What is the mission of the Information Management and Technology Directorate within the Office of the Secretary of Defense? How does technology form the connective tissue that ties OSD's missions together? And how is the Information Management and Technology Directorate maximizing the use of technology to support the Office of Secretary of Defense? I'll explore these questions and so much more with my very special guest, Danielle Metz, Director of the Information Management and Technology Directorate and CIO of the Office of Secretary of Defense. So Danielle, would you tell us more about the mission of your office and what prompted its creation? And more importantly, how does it support the overall mission of the Department of Defense?
Sure. So I think every great story begins with an origin story. And so the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Secretary Hicks, requested to have a study done to kind of assess the IT landscape of the Pentagon, and primarily of her Office of Secretary of Defense staff. And that's comprised of 17 principal staff assistants. And think of Undersecretary of Acquisition and Sustainment, Undersecretary of Research and Engineering. Those are the folks that are politically appointed, Senate confirmed, that serve at the behest of the administration. And so they're doing incredibly important work. But the IT, quite frankly, in the Pentagon has suffered over the past 20 plus years simply because of how we treated technology, either treating it as less than, not necessarily a critical part of mission. We used to also think that IT was like, if it was okay and we can make it cheaper so that we can scoop up some savings and apply it to other mission critical areas, then that's good enough. And so there was a number of consolidation efforts over those 20 years that kind of, decided this is going to be good enough, and we're going to take those dollars and apply it elsewhere. And so we kind of limped along with that. And Secretary Hicks is a real big believer in technology, ensuring that her workforce has the right tools to be successful. And so she commissioned this study. She asked me to do it we had a small team of talented government civilians and contractors. And in 60 days, we did an assessment, provided her a report with recommendations. And the way that we went about doing this report was really important to us to be able to talk to the user. So we conducted individual listening sessions with each of those principal staff assistants. We were able to hear their concerns, their frustrations, what was going right, what was going wrong. And I was able to ask one question that we received a consistent theme. And the question was, how do you use technology to execute your mission? And the resounding response was, we don't. And as a technologist, that was a real punch in the gut because my team and I have deployed a number of enterprise capabilities over the years for the Department of Defense and its mission partners. And to hear that it was not either there was business processes that were causing hindrances or we didn't have the right training for people to understand the power that was at their fingertips was really disconcerting. And so we took, the listening sessions. We did a lot of documentation review. I also reached out to what I affectionately call the historical figures, those who served senior IT leaders in the past, to ask them, hey, what you know now, how would you do it differently? And we fused all of that to provide the report. And the big issue or the big recommendation that we came up with was the OSD does not have a chief information officer or CIO. And so therefore, there's no one that is representing OSD from an IT strategic vantage point. There is not a community for OSD to see themselves as one as opposed to 17 individual kind of fiefdoms, each independently battling for precious resources, not having enough technical acumen because those were kind of taken away from them as well. And so you could see kind of a pattern of have and have-nots. There is a patchwork of ineffectiveness, I'll call it. And so we thought that professionalizing the CIO and having a CIO for OSD to treat OSD as an IT enterprise, change how we engage with the service provider so it's more customer focused and led as opposed to it being service provider driven, and then really maximizing the technology that we deploy. Those were the three main goals that we came up with. And so that's what we've embarked over the past year to kind of, go after those ambitious goals.
So it leads into what your role is as I understand it, the Director of Information Management and Technology within the Office of the Secretary of Defense. So what are your responsibilities and duties? And can you clarify, did your report lead to the establishment of a CIO in the Secretary's?
It did. So you know how the Department of Defense likes to have many titles. So I have two. I'm the Director of Information Management and Technology, and I'm also the OSD CIO. And so based on that, we went about, and the DSD, Secretary Hicks, established this office in October of 2023. So we just celebrated our year-plus anniversary. And so we tasked ourselves in that memo that she designated us as the OSD CIO to come up with an implementation plan to be able to show what key deliverables we were going to achieve over FY23, FY24, and then look on the horizon for FY25. And so that's exactly what we did. We submitted an implementation plan to Secretary Hicks February of 2023, and it touched on those three goals that I mentioned earlier. So treat OSD as an IT enterprise. And the way that we went about doing that was continuing those listening sessions with the principal staff assistants, creating governance forums for OSD. So we have two charter governance bodies. One is to have the entire OSD IT enterprise represented so we can come up with a voice for OSD that would then be represented in the second governance forum, which is the customer-led. So we have our service provider in the Pentagon. We have three main customer bases, OSD, Joint Staff, and Department of Headquarters Army. They're called the three onboarded customers. So we receive all of our services from the service provider. And so we created this forum that we were able to unite these three customer bases together, along with the other organizations that receive some services from the service provider. And this allows us to be able to, from the customer perspective, work together, synthesize our respective requirements, see what our modernization plans are, champion and prioritize what we need, work directly with the service provider, come up with performance metrics that we're able to hold not only the service provider, but ourselves accountable. And we meet on a quarterly basis to be able to do this. So for the past year, we've been working through this. Most times when people think of governance, they're like, oh, so boring, oversight, and people telling me what to do. The way I view and treat governance is that it's important for representing the user feedback, accountability, and transparency. Absolutely. And so that's what we've established it. Now we've been working with it. And FY24, we're really going to lean in and ensure that we truly represent the user community because that's who we serve, that we have the accountability and the transparency so that everyone's really witting of what technology is being deployed, how to use it, how well is it being received. And then based on all those data points, we'll be able to kind of pull levers and buttons to adjust accordingly. So that's how we came about for doing goal one of establish OSD as an IT enterprise. The second was to treat us like an OSD IT enterprise. So we went about doing that through those governance forums. And then the last is to maximize IT, so the technology that we're deploying. And we go about this in terms of ensuring that we have the right dynamic training, really understanding what the user's needs are, what they're missing, what capabilities that they think they're missing, and ensuring that they have the right customized training to ensure like the enterprise capabilities that we delivered, like DoD 365, that they understand not only do you have Teams and OneDrive, but you have all these other types of activities that you can do that can really make your collaboration and online productivity much more effective. And so we're able to see how through the listening sessions and the user experience surveys, how we're making some impacts based on those types of engagements. And it's really just bringing everything to the forefront and engaging the right folks at the right echelons, all the way up to the actual PSA, so they can really understand the importance of technology and that it is a critical undercurrent for everything and anything that we do in the Department of Defense.
So, Danielle, in your annual report, I'll call it, I like this phrase. You kind of point out that the IT capabilities form the connective tissue that ties the Office of Secretary of Defense and all their missions together. And to that end, I was hoping you could kind of maybe highlight some of the key strategic priorities you're pursuing, or at least tell us your vision going forward?
Right. So I think that the way that we're going about this is in a sequencing fashion. Because I think that's the other thing that, when you want to do a huge modernization activity, you go for the big bang. And then because it takes too long, it's too expensive, and people's persistence kind of wears out, you fall flat. So what we wanted to be able to do is this in a series of building blocks. And the first building block was what we call common IT. And I think about common IT as your networks, your end-user devices, strategies to get to cloud adoption, and your service desk. And so those are what we endeavored to do over the past year. And the first thing that we did was we developed, in concert with our customer base and the service provider, the first ever common IT memorandum of agreement between OSD and the service provider. And on its face, it might sound like, okay, you did a document, but it's so much more than that, because we clearly went over roles and responsibilities for the customer, the service provider, and my office. We also went through the services that were going to be provided, created service level agreements and performance metrics associated with that. That had never been done before. And if you go back when we were talking about the landscape, the IT landscape, part of the problem was nothing was written down, nothing was codified, no one knew what was happening, who was doing what to whom. So that's a breeding ground of just frustration, anger, finger pointing, and an inability to do anything right. So based on the listening sessions that we had with the principal staff assistants, there was common themes in terms of what were points of frustration. The first was the service desk. And so we have a service desk in the Pentagon, and it's what I'll call two-tiered. General population for government, civilian, and contractors, and then VIP for senior executives. Obviously, the VIP, amazing. General population, no. And so when you kind of peel and dig into kind of the inequality, I'll call it, the service desk, a lot of it has to do with how we went about doing the contracts, lowest cost, technically acceptable, a lot of turnover, which means you have fractured processes. There's shaky institutional knowledge. So DISA, Defense Information Systems Agency, had this enterprise program that was called Global Service Desk that they were deploying to the defense agency's field activities. They had a plan, kind of like a little star in the horizon of when they wanted to be able to migrate the Pentagon to this. Well, we took the initiative to accelerate that plan. And so we were successful in advocating for dollars, receiving dollars, and DISA will start implementing the Global Service Desk this fiscal year. And so that's going to be a significant change. So not only modernizing the tools that the service desk has, but also how we go about using the service desk. So instead of it being 100% outsourced, it is going to be what I'll call insource. So we are professionalizing the Tier 1 and Tier 2 folks that they're government. So they will be on GS 9, 11, 12. Mm-hmm. So that will help cut down on a lot of the turnover. That will help build the correct foundations for the institutional knowledge that is needed. And then the last piece that we're able to do is, unlike in today's current environment with the service desk where everything's really locked down, so a user can't do anything. Everything has to go through the service desk. So you have to do a trouble ticket, and it just kind of spirals out. A lot more automation and knowledge management will be bestowed upon the user. So for little things that make sense, they'll be able to do themselves. So that will create a sense of kind of like control, right? And reduce the burden on the service desk. So that, to me, will be a huge step forward and really addresses problems that the user community brought to us. So we were able to show in short order our value by listening, coming up with a plan, advocating for resources, and now implementing in a year. So that to me is incredibly significant. So those are two of the big things. Kind of in the future, what we're working on is the cloud adoption piece for OSD. OSD, I think, is probably 50 yards behind the start line. And it's really because the fact that, during those consolidation efforts for over the past 20 years, we took away the technical acumen, the professionals who were embedded or a part of the individual organizations to kind of scoop those up. We took away dollars. There wasn't a CIO for OSD. There's not an authorizing official for OSD. So there's a lot of pain points and burdens that really hinder OSD's ability to go out cloud adoption. So we're working on a corporate playbook to articulate, business processes that will inform the technical processes. And we're doing some pilot efforts with some of the PSAs. And then we're working really closely with Sharon Woods and her team at DISA, at the HAC, and trying to, again, make it so that we have the right tools in place and the right business processes in place to be able to do smart strategies for cloud adoption. And so that's on the horizon, but we're doing that partnership today. A lot of the planning is going in, again, with the stakeholders along with DISA on that. So I think, to me, that's just really kind of showcasing the idea that we talked about earlier, listening, coming up with a plan, the right resources, the follow-through through execution.
A lot of the work you're doing is driving implementation of technology to sort of make it cultivate a better digital experience for the end user across the Office of Secretary of Defense's IT enterprise. I'm wondering, what else are you doing in that area to kind of bolster that digital experience for folks?
Well, I think one of the other things that we were doing that hasn't been done before, the Air Force did it. They did it a couple years ago, is having user experience surveys. And so we worked closely with the Air Force, and we embarked on doing OSD's first ever user experience survey. So it was, we followed their methodology. And so we started in February. So we have about 10 months worth of data. Our goal is to have a year, so in February 2024. That will be our first baseline. And we asked 3 questions, very simple, and then the fourth is a free form. And this kind of allows us to get a unique data point from our user base. And the idea of doing it for a year is that our goal is to get the entire OSD population an opportunity to do this survey. So we're getting about 10% per month response rate, which I think is pretty good. Really good. It's on par with industry standard. What we learned early on, and Colt and his team advised us of this too, was when you ask questions that you think are simple, they're not. And so you start seeing how the responses are a little misleading or confusing because of the way that the question was interpreted, right? But what we didn't want to do was tweak it midway through. We needed to create that baseline, and it helps us learn and adapt. And so year 2, we'll be able to refine those questions. The timing of when we did this from February 2023 to February 2024 was really important because it's going to assess the current state before we start doing our modernization activities like the Global Service Desk. So it just worked out really well that we're able to get, I'll say, FY23 and the beginning of FY24 as our baseline. So 2 things will happen. We'll be able to refine our questions to solicit better responses, but also we'll be able to see as we're implementing the Global Service Desk, as we're doing the conference room standard configuration upgrades, as we're doing our end-user lifecycle replacement, hopefully with a 3-year replacement, those big kind of muscle movements, we have a working theory that we think that people are going to receive this well, but it'll be good to hear from the actual user if that's true or not, right? If they validate that working theory or if we're missing the mark. And then it kind of allows us to be able to adjust, right? So that we're not sticking to a course that is not meeting the mark for our user.
Are there any other accomplishments you want to highlight? And what does the future of your office, your portfolio look like going forward?
So right now we have an incredibly tiny team. And to go after all the building blocks that we want to be able to go after, get our hands around common IT, and then move forward to mission IT, which is where you see defense business systems and some more of the exquisite efforts and activities, we do need to have a little bit more resources. And so that is what we're working on for FY24, so that we can mature the office to go after the known gaps in terms of completing the mission with common IT, then being able to work with the OSD organizations to build out their needs for mission IT. And a lot of that's centered around defense business systems. And of course, DoD CIO has the overall lead with that. They're the ones that kind of come up with, again, that enterprise vision. But we need to have someone to translate and implement it for OSD. And so I think our office could be a natural fit for that, but only if we have the resources to be able to do that. So I can't accept mission and not be able to be successful.
Unfunded mandates here.
We know how well that works. History's littered with that.
This has been the Business of Government Hour, a conversation with Danielle Metz, Director of the Information Management and Technology Directorate and Chief Information Officer within the Office of Secretary of Defense. Be sure to join us next time for another informative, insightful, and in-depth conversation on improving government leadership and its effectiveness. Until then, subscribe, download, and listen to the entire interview at iTunes, Spotify, Audible, or on your favorite podcast app, or as always at businessofgovernment.org.